This could be one of Makita's greatest innovations ever. They just made a cordless, corded sander that will absolutely blow your mind with the features that this has, the performance, and how it dominates the competition, including Festool. If you'd like to check out this sander or any other tool you see in the video today, I'll link them in the description, the pinned comment, and that shop button right here on YouTube so you don't have to leave the platform. Let's go. All right, out of the box you get the sander itself. This is a 6-inch sander, slightly under 6 inches, but that's no different than the Milwaukee or even the Festool. They're all slightly under 6 inches, but they call them 6-inch sanders because of that diameter of the pad, I guess, is almost 6 inches. You also get this weird strap and this weird silver hook. I guess I shouldn't have thrown away the manual. I need to pick that up and read it again to figure out what these do. Okay, so the strap actually is an arm strap, which could come in handy to hold your cord up in case your cord's too heavy. No, actually I think what this is meant for is if you're wearing the backpack dust collection, then you can actually have this to keep that cord routed correctly. And this might be handy if you're working, say, overhead or even on a ladder or something like that, keep everything nice and tidy and not get tangled up on you. But I think for most woodworking shops, you might not need this. You let me know. The weird hook is actually kind of cool. I was like, what am I supposed to do with this hook? This hook is actually meant for a carabiner. So if you want to clip this to your side, you can use a carabiner to clip this on your side. Again, if you're working on a ladder, on scaffolding, or just elevated, this might be handy for you just to keep close. And I think it's a decent idea for that reason. Will I use it in the shop? I know. You also get a dust bag, a dust collection adapter, and of course the battery adapter kit. We've got a cordless sander with a cord. I bought this bare tool only because I already have 40-volt batteries in the shop from the Makita 40-volt track saw review. If you haven't seen that, you should absolutely check it out. But we have these on hand, also fully charged. We're going to go over the features, and I'm going to put it through the paces and compare it to some of the top competitors, including the new Milwaukee M18 sander. But one of the main questions I had when I first saw this a couple of months ago, I pre-ordered this, I paid for this, not sponsored. I saw this and I was like, why? Why do you put a battery on a cord? But it makes perfect sense because it lightens the weight and you don't have to worry about the battery basically putting too much pressure on one side of the sander or another. Like the M18 sander is very heavily weighted to the back, especially depending on what size battery you have. I have a 5.0 amp hour battery, and the Ryobi cordless sander is very similar. The battery just weighs down the back side. Now, if you take a look at this scale, this is my postal scale, look at how much these each weigh with a battery included. You're looking at 3 pounds, 15.7 ounces. We're like 0.3 away from 4 pounds here, and this is with a 4 amp hour Ryobi battery. If you compare that to something like the Milwaukee Fuel M12, which isn't the larger volt platform, it's the smaller one, this is a much better balance. This is one of my favorite cordless sanders. We'll see if the Makita takes that over, but even with this one, you're looking at 3 pounds and 3 ounces. So still over 3 pounds in the hand, and the bigger the battery, the more weight is putting to the back, so you have to kind of keep it balanced. When you look at this Milwaukee M18 sander, you're looking at you're looking at 4 pounds and 10 ounces. So on the heavier side of 4 pounds, getting closer to 5 there. When you take a look at this one, you don't have to worry about the balance issues, right? Because there's no weight back here pulling it down, and the sander by itself only weighs 2 pounds, 5 ounces. Very, very light, a very, very lightweight sander. And then of course this battery pack that clips to your belt clip will not affect anything to do with the sander because obviously they've offloaded that weight, and that is 2 pounds and 8 ounces, or 8.5 ounces to be exact, on a 4.0 amp hour battery. With the Milwaukee, I don't have anything lower than the 5 amp hour battery, but if you have 4 or 2 amp hours, then you could lighten the weight a little bit, but it's still going to add a lot of weight on the sander itself. Even Ridge's new 18-volt sander is kind of similar to the Milwaukee. It's shaped quite different. It's actually shaped more like this, but the battery still clips onto the back. I no longer have that sander, or I would show it. I've given it away since then. But you can see that the battery on the back is still going to add that weight. I think Makita did something absolutely genius, and I don't know that anybody else on the market does this with the cordless sanders. It might make this a viable option if you're looking for a cordless sander. We'll save our opinions to see how it performs. So as far as features go, it's a very lightweight sander. I can't explain that enough. It feels really nice in the hand. Of course, Makita quality, it feels good. This is a 5mm stroke as indicated by the 5. This is actually a 6-inch sander. even though the pad measurement is slightly under 6, but that's no different than the Milwaukee or even the Festool 6-inch sanders are all slightly under 6 inches. But you do get a lot more surface area here versus the 5-inch orbital sanders like this Milwaukee. You're looking at 40% more surface area, and I've had people challenge me on that, but you can Google it. It really is that much more, and it just doesn't seem that way because of the two sizes. But as far as feeling the hand goes, this is one of the most ergonomic designs that you can get. And the reason I know that is because the Festool is shaped very, very similar to this. You put your hand up here like this and it just feels good in the hand when you're sanding, especially when you start sanding long periods of time. This is one of my favorite corded sanders, and I'm glad they went with this style. This is much like Mirka, Festool. A lot of them are using this kind of a design, and I think it's a good idea. Now this is also a variable speed sander, so you can dial it down or you can dial it up depending on how much speed you need. And then of course there's that belt clip again. Now the way the cord attaches to the sander, it clips in and you can hear an audible click, so you know it's actually snapped in place. You'll put arrow to arrow when you snap it in. It will not go this way, it must go like that. There is one single power button right there on the front, and then on the right side of the sander you do get the Bluetooth connection. If you have a Makita dust extractor, this can Bluetooth to that so that when you power this on, your dust extractor comes on. I have that on the Festool and it's awesome. Now we're going to power this on for the first time just to kind of get my first impressions on it. Now, one thing that I was very, very impressed with the Milwaukee M12 cordless sander is the lack of vibration. We're talking near zero. I even went and got a cup of water, filled it halfway up, and we're going to give that same test that we did on the Milwaukee to this and compare it to these others to see how it stands up. But I haven't tested this yet, so let's see what's up. That thing is smooth. That is surprisingly smooth. I was expecting Milwaukee vibration, even Festool vibration. This might be a little better than the Festool. It may be close. We'll find out. So just initial impressions before we test how hot this thing will get after sanding for several minutes, which you know we always do that. First, with the dust extractor connected, there's very, very minimal dust coming out. Anywhere it's collecting almost all that dust, which is great. So really good dust collection. It really doesn't matter if I was using the Festool Granite sandpaper or the 3M Extract sandpaper. The Festool Granite doesn't line up on every single hole, but the majority of the holes are open there for that dust collection. There's a couple reasons why you'd want to use a dust collector, which we get into, but the dust bag does do a fairly decent job. Now you may see some dust coming out from the side of the sander because there's no suction there to pull it back into the bag. Just the fan or motor itself, the air flow through that is what will cause it to go into the bag. But just after about a minute of sanding, you see how much of this dust is collected, and that's very, very fine dust. We're talking, it's like flour, like your baking flour. That's how fine this dust is. So it is pulling in a lot of that fine dust into the dust bag, but I do see that filling up fairly quickly if you're doing quite a bit of sanding. I would actually recommend a dust extractor, no matter if you go with Makita or my favorite, Festool. Dust extractor, my favorite Festool, my favorite dust extractor, Festool. Now there's actually two reasons why you would want to use a dust extractor with a sander, even if it's a cordless sander, depending on your work obviously, but if you're doing woodworking, you're in a shop and you have the budget to get a dust extractor or even a shop vac with a HEPA filter, there's a couple of things that's going to benefit any sander. It doesn't matter if it's this one or what. First and foremost is airflow. It's pulling air through the sander, past that motor, so it keeps that motor cooler. It also keeps, actually three reasons. It also keeps your sandpaper cooler because friction obviously is happening there when the sandpaper is going onto the wood or sanding the wood, and that friction builds up heat. And if you can reduce that heat, it will make the life of your sandpaper last longer and the quality of your finished sanded product better because it doesn't get that sandpaper caked up on there, getting baked on and all that stuff. And then of course the third and one of the most important reasons is your health, especially the HEPA filters, because they're going to filter out upwards of 97, some of them 99% of that particulate matter that gets into the air when you're sanding, so you don't breathe that stuff in, because that really fine dust, like this that you saw here, this powder flour looking stuff, is very, very dangerous to your health. Very dangerous. So if you can collect that, it's much better. All right, so I sanded this entire white oak slab. It actually had some finish on there, and that's what I was sanding off. And as you can see, the dust collection, again, is absolutely amazing. Even the pad itself has minimal, and I mean minimal buildup here. Just on the backside, you can see a little bit of that dust on there, but not much at all. And this 3M actually works really well with this sander. And included with this sander is this pad here that helps prevent this from wearing out very often. You can just replace one of these much easier than you can the entire pad. So dust collection is phenomenal. Now heat buildup, I was a little worried about that when I first started because some sanders can overheat, 3M. But this one is probably one of the cooler ones that I have tested. Shooting the thermal imager right inside those vents, I think 92 was the highest point that I saw. If it was a little higher, Chris is going to pop it on the screen. This, I think it was 92 degrees was the hottest, and that was actually inside, internal where the motor is. Where your hand sets, it's a cool, comfortable, it's in the high 80s, but it's not warm at all. Like you don't feel that warmth, you don't notice it. Some sanders you do feel that heat buildup up there, but this one absolutely not. So I think the thermal workings on this is great. I think the actual dust collection is absolutely amazing. As far as like vibrations and stuff like that go, I sanded this whole thing in about 20-ish minutes or so, and my hand's not stinging or numb or anything like that. There is some slight vibration, much like the Festool has. We'll compare in just a minute, but I think that's where it's going to be comparable at. But it's not excessive. It doesn't bother me at all. It's a sander. We'll get into it. As far as battery life goes, I've got 2 bars left on this 40-volt battery after about 30 minutes of total sanding time today. I mean, if it gives you an hour, 45 minutes to an hour on one battery, I think you're going to be perfectly fine, especially these 4 amp hour batteries. I don't see where it's fine. Like battery life is battery life, and that's what it's going to be. One of the most disappointing battery lives was the Milwaukee M12 with the smaller amp hour batteries. For the smaller battery and the bigger battery, I think the max time I got was high 20 minutes or so on those. So I think we're going to be fine with battery life. You're going to get better battery life here versus something like those Milwaukees. M12s. As far as battery life go, Makita actually states up to 48 minutes of continuous sanding using a 4 amp hour 40 volt XGT, and I would estimate that that's probably where I was going to be round about that 45 minute mark with this one. I don't see an option for a 2.5 millimeter stroke on this sander yet. It may be coming. I may have missed it. If there's one, I'll link it in the description. I opted for the 5 millimeter because I think that's the best for most people who are doing woodworking. In other words, you're sanding cutting boards, tabletops, slabs like you see here. The 5 millimeter stroke's just a little more aggressive as far as strokes go. You would want the 2.5 millimeter or 3/32, depending on if you're into that sort of thing. If you're sanding veneers or finishes or something more delicate than just wood, this is still going to give you a really good finish or finished sand as you step through your grits. This is still going to look good when you stain and all that stuff or paint or anything like that. That 5 millimeter is just what I prefer. I think it's the best for most woodworkers, but you do you. Another observation is the battery itself. I think this is absolutely genius on Makita's part. I actually like the belt clip. That's a good idea, especially if you're working up high. And at first I was like, why do I need this armband? It made me feel like the Ultimate Warrior. You probably don't know who that is unless you grew up in the 80s and 90s and only had 2 channels. But it basically was like this armband around this wrestler's arm. And that's what I felt like when I was wearing it. But I understand why it's there, because at times this could become a trip hazard depending on where you're working. Now me at the workbench in the shop, not likely, highly unlikely. But if you are on ladders and scaffolding and things like that, I can see why they wanted to include that, and I'm glad it's there. And then also on the battery itself, there is a little cord clip so that you can start basically round it back towards your person there. Now I think if you're going to use these and you're not wearing a belt would probably be handy just to keep it up a little more. I'm not a belt wearer unless we're doing something fancy, and other than that, I don't like them. So right there on the pocket, I had 0 issues, didn't notice anything about it. After a couple of seconds, I just didn't even notice it. I just sanded like normal, and I think it keeps the sander the star of the show without the weight or anything interfering with your sanding. It's a nice belt clip. So let's talk about the vibration or lack thereof, depending on which sander you're choosing here. Now I've got a few here we're going to test. The Festool is my corded sander of choice. I use this the most as far as corded sanders go, and I think this is a really good option. This is actually the ETS EC 150/5. Again, that 5 there on the end means 5 millimeter stroke. I like this sander a lot. I like the ergonomics of it. I like the dust collection. I like the lack of vibration or stinging hand. But you can see when you put that cup on there that you can see a little bit of vibration there, but it's not enough to affect you after sanding 30, 45 minutes, something like that. You don't really get that stingy, numb hand, but it does have minimal vibration. If you take that and put it on the new M12 sanders, the 2.5 millimeter stroke I test first here, and it, again, as shown in the full review of these 2 sanders, 0 vibration. This has the least vibration of any sander that I have ever used to date. But again, it's also that less aggressive 2.5 millimeter stroke, so you're not removing as much material at a time. When you step up to the 5 millimeter stroke, you see a tiny bit of vibration, but not quite as much as the Festool. Still a really nice smooth sander. These are probably the smoothest sanders I've ever used. When you test the Ryobi, whew, your hand's gonna be stinging after a little bit. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad sander, I'm saying it has a lot of vibration, and that's going to affect how your hand feels after a few minutes of sanding. If you've used cheaper sanders, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Let me know in the comments if that's happened to you. Now, if you move up to the M18 sander, there's a little bit of vibration here too. I would call it between the Festool and between the Ryobi, somewhere in that middle ground, probably a little closer to the Festool than the Ryobi. Not quite as much vibration, but there is some there that you feel, and I just don't care for this new form factor. I just don't. I think the Rigid actually has a better form factor than this one, but they wanted to accept these bigger batteries here, so they had to give it a little more space. It's all right. I'm not a fan of this sander actually, which is why you haven't seen a full review. Should I do a full review? And finally, the Makita is probably really close to the Festool as far as vibration goes. As you can see them side by side, they're very similar, at least from my perception of using them here. We'll see post-edit what they look like side by side, but I think they're gonna be very, very close, which means there may be a little vibration there, but it's not a bad thing. In other words, it's not gonna hurt your hand. Now, before I tell you, should you buy this, let's talk about what I like, what I don't like, and what I would change if I had to. First and foremost, I absolutely love the dust collection on this. It's probably some of the best I've seen on any sander, including my beloved Festool. I'm not gonna lose my Festool cart again, right?
Stop, stop, stop. Wait, hold it. Hand it over.
Seriously?
Yep. Come on. Yep, hand it over.
Well, I mean, there's that. But I do think it has a really good dust collection. I like that they include that extra backing pad so you don't ruin the main pad. I love how this doesn't get hot. Even the Festool gets warm, but this one stays very cool and comfortable for long periods of sanding time. I like that, and I think it's a really well done. I wasn't sure how I felt about a cordless sander. I felt like, why would you do this if you could just put a cord on it? Well, the main reason is if you need to work remotely, up high, or anything like that. This is a genius idea. And if you're in the Makita platform and you want a very good sander, this is the way to go. I mean, bare tool. Let's compare prices here. High-end sanders cost a lot of money, and there's a reason why. Because they can. No, it's true, but they are better than the budget options. I've used DeWalt for many years. I've tried dozens of different sanders that I tried. The best sander under $100, the DeWalt come out on top, spoiler alert. But even the DeWalt lacks a lot when you start comparing them to these style sanders because it just matters. It's just a different experience, night and day difference really. But they do come at a premium. Now if we're talking about prices here, this Festool sander is $600. And of course, you don't have to have a battery or anything like that, but it's $600. And that is a lot of money for a sander, a lot. And there's no getting around that. The M18 5-inch sander, which is a smaller area, remember 40% less sanding surface here on this 5-inch sander. I don't care for it a whole lot, and it's $199 bare tool. Step up just a little bit, and this 6-inch Makita sander that you offload the weight of the battery on with phenomenal dust collection, extremely good heat dissipation, and just a good overall sand, $249 bare tool. Seems like a lot, but it's probably one of the better priced high-end sanders that I've used at this price point. It is that good. And then you jump over to the 6-inch Milwaukee. These two sanders, depending on which stroke rate you want, these are $299 each bare tool. $299 for this, or $249 for this. Which one would I pick? I think it depends on which battery platform you're already in. Of course, if that's gonna really sway you. I think these 40-volt max tools from Makita are changing my mind on a bunch of stuff, especially Makita tools. It's kind of famously known here that I haven't in the past reviewed a bunch of Makita tools, but I was very impressed with the Makita 40-volt track saw. And I'm very impressed. I am super impressed with this sander. I think this is one of the best, this is the best cordless sanders that you can buy. Now, I'll preface that by saying these Milwaukees are absolutely amazing, and the only reason that I grade them slightly under this Makita is battery life. Because they're using the M12 system, they're using those smaller capacity batteries or smaller voltage batteries, the battery life just isn't here. Everything else is. This is a very smooth sander. Very good dust collection, very good heat dissipation, very good sanding finish. The only thing that keeps this not exactly equal with this in my mind is the battery life. And these batteries don't add a ton of weight, so you don't really have to worry too much about that balance, but it does put some of the weight on the back. But with Makita offloading the battery and giving you a top sander, like a high-end sander, this, if you're a Makita fan, or even if you're not, you should probably consider this. It's a no-brainer. This is a very, very good sander, and you can color me impressed. Again.
Hold it, wait, hold it. Hand it over.
Seriously?
Yep, hand it over. I know.
Come on, Chris. It's just barely under. So a couple things I don't like about this design. It's kind of a trade-off, right? You offload the weight from the sander onto your side. It's not a big deal to put 3-4 pounds on your side. It's negligible when you're out working and stuff. But the one downside that it's almost happened to me already since I've been using this is you're gonna set this on the workbench and you're gonna walk away. And as you walk away, it's gonna pull the cord and then, yeah, that's gonna happen. So you have to be cognizant of that and remember that you do have a cord attached to you to a tool. Now, there's a couple accessories that will take this to the next level if you're into sanders or woodworking really. First and foremost, you need a dust extractor or a shop vac. I'll link to the Makita dust extractor that pairs extremely well with this, including that Bluetooth button, or the Festool dust extractor, which I use a Bluetooth button on the hose. I think either one of those will be excellent choice for this kit. Next is sandpaper. I think 3M extract sandpaper, like you see here, it sticks extremely well, which is huge, and it works so well. And it's affordable as far as great quality sandpaper goes. There's a massive difference in this versus the cheap box store stuff that I've used in the past. I've just been a fan of 3M since I started using it. And of course, if you saw how I have my sandpaper sorted, I think this is about one of the better options out there. This is actually made for art supplies, but it works extremely well for 5- and 6-inch sandpaper, and it's about $35. If they're trying to charge you more than that, don't buy it. They're trying to price gouge you. I'll link to this as well. I only say that because in the past when I've linked to that and traffic goes to it, they try to raise the price a little, so don't buy unless it's $35, in my opinion. If you like this video, check out the Milwaukee sander reviews. You're gonna love these too, and you're gonna have a hard time choosing. Click in the box, get you the big old virtual fist bump.